All right, so yeah, Seth was letting me know that you guys actually have some UA gear at the school, um, notably the LA2 1176 610 console, or I should say the LA 610. So if you guys aren't familiar with kind of the background history of UA, UA was actually established in 1958 by Bill Putnam Sr. An interestingly enough, born in Illinois, where he started his career in recording engineering. In 1955, he built Universal Recording in Chicago, where he actually recorded artists such as Count Basie and Duke Ellington. Uh, Pretty much became one of the most sought after engineers, and artists such as Quincy Jones pretty much urged him to build a studio on the West Coast. So in 1957, he built United Recording off of Sunset, and later acquired Western Recorders, which I'll show you here. So down in the left corner is actually Coast Recorders. And then on the right-hand side there, you'll see some of the analog gear you might be familiar with. So we have the 610 console, LA2 and 1176. And actually, if I backtrack here, this is Bill Putnam with Nat King Cole in the studio. So Bill had many firsts. So he was known as the father of modern recording. So he was the first to use tape repeat, the first to use multi-voice recording. So taking one vocal, recording another on a different tape, and then layering them together. He was the first to use an 8-track recording alongside his close friend Les Paul. He was the first to use artificial reverb, first to use artificial delay in the studio, and the first to develop a multiband equalizer in the US. Later in 1957, he built United Recording off of Sunset and moved to California. So once he came to California around 1958, that's when Universal Audio was actually founded. There was multiple companies under his umbrella, which if you see the LA2, you'll see Teletronics. So Teletronics actually originally invented the LA2, and they were acquired in the early 1960s. The LA2 compressor is actually a tube compressor that has a light dependent resistor, which is the T4 optical cell. And this was originally used by CBS and RCA, which was more for broadcast, and then eventually ported over for recording musicians. The 1176 actually stemmed off of that original LA2 compressor and was actually more of a solid state build, which is a transistor based compressor. And this was under UREI, which you'll see these here. So you got the 1176 peak limiter and the LA2 Teletronics original pamphlets right there. Then there was the 610 console. So you guys actually have the LA610. So the LA610 is actually a 610 preamp with an LA2 compressor in a single channel strip. The 610 console there was actually originally developed in the early 1960s, and by the late 1960s was pretty much in most American studios across the nation. That was actually the first modular console. So if one of those channel strips had some issues, you didn't have to take the entire thing apart, which is kind of nice. And that was actually the original console used on the Van Halen record, which then Van Halen actually had one of these put in his own home studio. So it's been around for quite some time. And then around 1962, Bill Putnam and Les Paul were actually simultaneously around the same time the first guys to do stereo recording. And so Bill Putnam kind of foresaw the future and started creating stereo mixes and stereo recordings. And then in the early 1960s, major labels were reaching out to him to mix these stereo versions. And he was bringing in somewhere around 200,000 a month. which to today's standards was almost 2 million a month. So at that point in time, Bill Putnam was doing very, very well. Uh, so that kind of gives you a background. I mean, he's engineered the Beach Boys, Nat King Cole, and he was also Frank Sinatra's main engineer. When he moved to the West Coast, Sinatra actually put him on retainer so that he was always readily available, since he was one of the most sought after producers, artists, and engineers in the industry at the time. But he continued under his umbrella companies and even out of these studios, manufacturing and distributing the analog gear. Now, if we fast forward to today, UA was actually refounded in 1999 after Bill Putnam Sr.'s passing in 1989. His sons, Bill Putnam Jr. and Jim Putnam, who went to Stanford, where he studied in the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, started recreating the hardware reissues and creating virtual emulations of all the classic UA gear. And that kind of leads us to where we're at today. So now, is everyone here familiar with the Apollo, or the satellite that you guys might have? Can I get a hand raise if you do? Hey, nice. Just want to see if you guys are familiar with any of this stuff. So, yeah, as we fast forward, there's the hardware family, which you might be familiar with, that LA610, LA2, 1176, which you guys have in the studio. But we have the U82 accelerators. So in 2001, UA actually came out with the first DSP processor, which was the first emulation of our analog gear. And so the DSP allowed more complex computations that wasn't taxing on the computer and wasn't like it is today, where we have extremely fast M1s and M2s. So this offloaded the processing from the computer. So now when you were using plugins, you always had low latency with your sessions. And this allowed the more integrity of establishing how the analog gear was actually going to sound. So we currently make the Octo satellites, which, instead of the original PCIe card with one DSP chip or digital signal processor, we now have 8. So you guys, I believe, have an Octo in your studio. So anytime you're using the U82 plugins on the satellite, it's not going to draw power from the computer. So we've got multiple models of these. Thunderbolt, we still make the PCIe cards only as Octos, and they are available for Windows. Then fast forward again to today, as far as the plugins go, now we have native plugins. So U80 Spark is subscription based, and this allows anyone to use 30 plus of our native plugins. So you guys can actually check this out if you guys haven't already. So no matter what computer you have, this will still be able to run, provided you're on the right operating system. But I definitely encourage you guys to check out a lot of the plugins that we have on this platform. I believe you can do 2 weeks free from the start. So with that being said, we have the Apollo. So hopefully you guys are familiar with our Apollo line. So the Shark chips that you see on this board are actually the DSP chips that we've been using since 2001. So when this was refounded in 99, we were making PCIe cards with DSP chips. Then by 2012, this is when we actually came out with the first Apollo. So the idea behind this was to take the coveted UA plugins used by the industry and allow low latency tracking with an interface. So with that being said, anytime you track through any of the channels, if you want to throw on a 610 pre with an LA2 and a 1176 compressor like you guys are using in the analog realm, you get the same kind of feature at sub 2 millisecond latency. So it doesn't matter how dense your session is, when I'm recording in on that channel, I'm always going to have low latency. Um, and you can combine up to 4 Apollos together. So not only that, you've got a lot of I/O options. So when it comes to Thunderbolt connectivity, there's expandability. So if I buy a twin with 2 channels, I can always add an 8-channel interface or a 16-channel interface to those 2 inputs that I currently have. So it's a completely expandable system. And the unison technology that we offer on the preamps actually do impedance, gain stage, and circuit behavior matching of any preamp that I use. So whether I use an API console, SSL, Neve, the Helios 69, Avalon 737, everything is going to have a physical change of the Apollo preamp to match that analog pre that you're using. So as far as the Apollo desktop models, these are the more affordable versions, but the exact same specs. So the converter chips, DSP, everything that's built on here is no different than what you're getting from our $3,000 and $4,000 models. So we have Thunderbolt and Windows versions available for any of the customers. Then we have the Apollo racks. So these are just more expanded options, and they all have 6 DSPs built in. And then we do have our new Volt line of interfaces. So this is more of the non-DSP, kind of more affordable option. So you do get on the 76 models a built-in 1176 compressor on the analog circuit. Still has very good converters built in, different kind of design, but for anyone who's just getting started, this could definitely be a good solution if you guys already aren't taking advantage of the UA line of interfaces. And then we do have microphones as well. So the higher end stuff, the standard series, definitely more on the affordable side on the standard series, but the box series is a 251, an 87, and a 67. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bach, but in LA, he was one of the top microphone designers, and we acquired him and his designs, and these just recently hit the market right now. Then we do have our modeling mics, which is the Sphere, the DLX, which is actually a stereo mic in and of itself. And then you've got the LX, which is a smaller version, which is just a mono mic. So there's 38 different mic models. What's cool is you can do a stereo recording just hanging the mic down, and you don't have to worry about phasing issues between the mics. So because the SPL is actually very high on these microphones, you can do them as overheads for drums. I've actually used them on the bottom of acoustic guitars before. And even after the fact of recording, I can throw this on as a plug-in. So if I was too close to the acoustic guitar, sometimes you might end up with a lot of low mids. I could actually adjust the proximity after the fact and pull my guitar or the microphone back, ideally. So that way I can adjust any mistakes I might have been. Maybe I was an inch too close to the guitar. So it's really cool too. I mean, if you aren't familiar with a lot of microphones, also being able to just record a take and then cycle different microphone flavors after the fact, kind of lets you know maybe what works best with certain vocals or certain instruments. Standard series, we just came out with the Hemisphere microphone modeling plugin. So even on these, you can adjust the style of mic in a similar fashion to the Sphere. So the guys that actually designed the Sphere microphone, which was Chris Townsend, and Chris Nyman, who designed these same microphones, added that same technology into these. So I use these SP1s a lot. They're only $3.99 with a stereo bar and great for overheads. I've got a lot of guys using these live on drums, and I mic my acoustic with these mics. But actually, so I know we wanted to talk more careers, so I just kind of wanted to cover at least our product line. But UA actually is employed with over 200 employees, and we have offices in LA, Colorado, and actually our European headquarters in Amsterdam. So, when it comes to this industry, there's a lot of different opportunities for careers. You don't exactly have to just be the recording engineer. I can tell you, working at this company, even guys that are in the finance department, guys that are working as coders, quality assurance engineers, they're all amazing musicians. And they all have maybe some experience, or maybe even in their free time, they're all kind of doing recording engineering. But you're not limited to only those positions. So if you have any experience as a coder, as an engineer, as a product developer, those all go into play with all these companies. So kind of something to think about. But having recording and engineering experience is definitely going to help you get into this industry. Um, have any of you guys ever attended NAMM, the big convention down here in LA? Well, if you haven't, you definitely should, because the key is going to be to really network. I can tell you, getting into this industry, I started out in Texas, which doing sound design, I ended up with Native Instruments first. So getting into that position, school actually helped me get into that career by making the right connections. And that was after I'd already graduated from the University of North Texas. So, the professors that were teaching in there were involved with a lot of other companies. And I essentially just, took that class to try to get in and meet as many people as I could, make some sort of impression. And then I was constantly looking online for available careers with companies that I liked. So this day and age, LinkedIn is going to be kind of your biggest friend. So a lot of companies, even regardless of the music industry, that's where they're going to look to, hire new guys and find people who are qualified. So, my huge suggestion is, if you don't have a LinkedIn, definitely get one. And I would suggest keeping it updated with a, current resume, everything you've done, any certifications, any sales experience, any outside experience is going to help. And, keep your eye out, because I get asked that question all the time. I'd be in stores, visiting some retail stores or something, and people would always ask me, how'd you get that job? I really want to get that job. And my first thing I asked was, have you looked? Have you even looked online to see if anything's available? No. And, then it kind of leads to that where, okay, how do you expect something to happen if you're not out there looking for it? So by, being proactive, it's just going to increase your chances. And at least, then you have some idea of maybe where you want to go. And again, with this industry, kind of once you get your foot in the door, kind of jump in somewhere else. If you're not happy with that type of position, becomes much easier because you've already kind of gotten in the door. And that seems to be the hardest thing. But to be honest, as long as you're out there networking, NAMM is one of the best places to network with companies, because almost every company is there, and you can make connections, get business cards, and kind of go from there. Well, actually, I do have a question. So how is this school right now a certification, or is it actually a full degree?
Yeah,
Like a
right now, right now this is a Bachelor of Arts in Music, and we offer a concentration in music technology.
Nice. So are most, I mean, concentration, see, that's awesome, because even when I went to college, we didn't really have music recording at UNT, so we were all just musicians. And I was just a classical musician in the orchestra. So, we had a studio there, and I pretty much was just sitting in. But the irony is, I didn't even end up getting a degree in recording. Most of the time I was just out there digging, finding studios and trying to work with as many artists as I possibly could. And, if you guys have the opportunity here to use studio gear or bring any outside musicians to test recording, do everything you can, because it's ultimately going to come down to experience. And the more experience you have, the better you're going to be. Um, but yeah, so now obviously even with UA alone, we have multiple offices. We've got, like I said, Colorado, LA, Amsterdam, even in Europe. And each of these offices kind of focuses on different sectors. So, we also make guitar products. So a lot of the Colorado office is mostly focused on our recording system, guitar products. And, if you go up to Scotts Valley here, all of the analog gear is still handmade, built one at a time, in the custom shop. And it goes through vigorous testing. So it goes by season. So they can only hand build so many at a time. And we still sell out of them. And then obviously the Apollos and any of the newer products on the horizon, that's what we're developing in Scotts Valley. So there's all sorts of opportunities as far as careers with any of these companies. But I mean, is there any questions about the careers, about any of the products, anything you guys just want to ask me, anything at
So
all?
there's a mic here, and if you speak loudly, it should be picked up if you have a question. Yeah, go for it. So in case you didn't hear it, asking if you can have a business card, would it be okay if I passed along your contact information if students were interested?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I can actually put it in the chat here too.
Okay, great.
Of course, I'm on sharing right now. Do I need to stop the share to do that? Let me see. Yeah, let's do this. I'll put it here in the chat. But you guys, yeah, just shoot me an email anytime. If you guys have any UA questions, feel free. There's we have a lot of products, a lot of different opportunities. Um, Definitely if you're looking to get into this industry, just keep your eye out. Keep your eye out for opportunities. LinkedIn is such an amazing place to see that, start following the companies that you like, and they'll always be posting, updates with available positions, that sort of thing.
Any other questions? We still have a couple minutes. Yeah, Christian.
What, like after graduating, what's your, like, what job did you work for? How long did it take you to get to Hawaii?
So what jobs did you do post-graduation? How long did it take you from completing your undergrad to getting your job at maybe Native Instruments? Because that was like the foot in the door.
Yeah, so it actually wasn't that long after, to be honest. So, during my time in college, I was teaching school districts. I was teaching as a percussionist, and I was teaching guitar because I've been playing both since I was 6. And then I was working random sales jobs. So I worked at, Best Buy. I was like working in Magnolia, getting sales experience on high-end home theater gear. And then, while this time was going on, I was working at the track and teaching. And then I ended up leaving Best Buy. I got a job at Guitar Center, mainly so I could get discounts on stuff. So that's typically the move. And while I was there, so I must have been 20. So I graduated at 22. While I was at Guitar Center, I started taking the sound design course from Dubspot. And back then, Dubspot had just hit the market, but I knew I couldn't afford to go to New York, so I took the online school. But when we were working with professors one-on-one, I knew I had all this experience in music that I just spent the money hoping for the best. And, that was my goal, was to get to Native Instruments at that point in time. it's actually if I backtrack here, when I was in college, the reason I found Native Instruments was when I was just sitting in the studio sessions, taking notes of how they were recording in Pro Tools. Some guy brought me in and I was, doing like a little jazz combo and I was playing drums as a session musician. And I kept wondering how we were going to, track the pianist because we didn't have an amp. And there was a MIDI cable that went to the wall. And he looked at me and he said two words, Native Instruments. And I had no idea what he was talking about. So he pulled up Contact. I thought it was the craziest thing because I had never experienced it. And I was 20 at the time. And then, in 2022, I started, or yeah, 22, I took that sound design certification. And at the exact same time, for an entire year, I just kept checking on the careers section of Native Instruments. And then there was a producer product specialist role that showed up at the exact same time that my professor at that point in time happened to be a product specialist for Native Instruments. And I happened to live in Texas where they didn't have anybody. And I let him know, and that was it. So then it was like 6 month hiring process, which was pretty intense. It's not like that anymore, but I had to do, performance, and I had multiple phone call interviews. But 6 months later, I ended up working at Native Instruments in Texas. So then they sent me to Atlanta to shadow, one of a coworker at Native Instruments to see how to do the field marketing position. So I was heading to like Guitar Centers and Sam Ash and other places as a rep. And that guy that I met is now my current boss at Universal Audio. So he ended up getting me the job at UA, who I got a phone call from 3 months later. So for a time period, I was working for both Native Instruments and Universal Audio, and it all happened really fast. So I was 23, then 24. And even, and during that whole time, I was just kind of a independent contractor. So I wasn't officially employed, but it allowed me, there wasn't really a conflict of interest, and they just kind of sent me where they needed to go, which was very cool. Because this was 2012 and that was when the first Apollo came out. So we didn't even have any Apollos on the market. So I had no idea where this was going to go. And, fast forward, I'm turning 36 next month and I'm still here. So, I've watched this whole company grow immensely. Obviously, now we've got a ton of products. But interestingly enough, all the guys that I started with are practically still at the company. So I think I was like one of 5 people in the sales meetings, and now we've got, like 70 people in these sales meetings. So, you know, I've been here, for a while. 6 years after I got hired, I got actually 5 years after I got hired, I kept begging them to move me to LA, and finally a position opened up. They sent me over here, and now I'm full time. So now I actually handle a lot of the West Coast plus Minnesota. So it's, Vegas, Arizona, Utah, Colorado. Randomly here and there, I'm not employed with NI, but sometimes if they just need like an artist or some help, I'll sometimes go over here because they have an office in LA. But, my main focus here now, I've been doing a lot of commercial trailer music, like trailer film stuff on the side. When I moved here, I met a lot of the guys from Anjuna Beats, which UA actually helped me meet these guys. I met them at NAMM. So while I was working at NAMM, I actually ended up meeting the artists I was listening to and then making connections with them. And that was about the same time I moved to LA. They happened to live here, and then, kind of the rest is history. So, a lot of it was just me taking chances, to be honest. It was just, I didn't know if it was going to work out, but again, in my head, I just knew that my chances would be higher unless I just, if I wait around, nothing's going to happen. So the key is just, if you really want something, you just have to take baby steps to get there and figure out, well, how are you going to get there? Everyone kind of has their own story. Mine was kind of, its own thing, but at the same time, I took the chance, and I could have, not gotten it, but I was lucky at the time because I ended up meeting a guy who happened to be, friends with some guy that left Line 6, who started at UA. And that's what I mean about networking. And then when you're talking with people, it's like you just never know. In fact, uh, this EP that I did for Music Bed, and now this company that I do a lot of commercial licensing from, which I'm consistently bringing in monthly income, is actually based in Fort Worth, Texas. And when I had built a studio in Dallas, I was working on a few independent films. And this is while I was working at UA. I just started getting into cleaning up audio and mixing. And I didn't think I was going to do it with videos, but there was a guy that had a studio next to me in this space that I built, who was Bradford Knight. And we were both percussionists, and we ended up doing a track together, which Nike ended up licensing, I think, a year and a half after we made it. So then we made some lump sum, of money, and we didn't even think anything was going to happen with that. And but ironically, the guy that I was actually helping in that studio never paid me and owes me a lot of money. And so I ended up having to leave that place, and you'll see that a lot in this industry. And 2 years ago, Brad randomly reached out to me, and I've already recouped all that money that that guy owed me back then. So, had I not taken that chance, and which I thought was a total failure, I never would have met Brad. So once again, just, you know, if something doesn't work out, don't get too down. Just keep going, and again, sometimes these connections that you meet, it might be 5 years later, you get a phone call and then they're like, hey, I think you'd be good at this, and then you just take that. So just, obviously don't blow up your accounts, like financial accounts, but take chances and just be smart, but be on the lookout. Nothing's gonna just happen. You got to make it happen. That's all, really what it comes down to. And once you make that effort, then other things might just happen. So, that's my advice.